Hi everyone. I thought I would record a very quick tutorial about how you could create an environment. This doesn't have to be tied to a particular module, such as the 3D modeling module. It could be useful to those that are doing games development and just trying to think of how would they or how might they create a very simplistic environment like the one you see in front of you, and techniques of how that could be done, and as well as advice of what you might want to do to enhance this or other options to consider. So, let's have a little look. This is what we're going to create. I will be giving you the 3D file so you can have a look at it in your own time. But what I'll do is, this is my practice. All I'm going to do is hide this one for now, so we start fresh. So, all I'm going to do to get started is I'm going to go to the Create tab. So we have the Create tab, this little plus sign here, and the Modify tab, which is this one to the right. These are probably the two most common ones we're going to use in this quick tutorial. From here, we go to the Create tab. We instead go from Geometry, which is usually the default, to Shapes. As soon as I left click there, you'll see the top left option is Line. That shows me on the right section. I like to work in across 4 views, like I've got here. So we're going to work on our top view here, and I'm going to go to the line by left clicking to activate it. And in my top view, the reason I'm using my top view is I'm trying to think about creating a floor plan. So all I'm going to do is, if I left click on my screen with line selected, I get my first vertex. I know it's my first vertex because it's highlighted yellow. Every vertex after this will be white. This helps me wherever I go with it, it's tethered in. And when I come back, if I want to close the spline and close the loop, I make sure I come all the way back and click back on that yellow vertex. So if I was to hold shift, it snaps to 90 degrees. I'm just going to create a nice little simple shape. It's a bit more interesting than just creating a box. And what I'm going to show you, that if you wanted to, we can still edit and change them, so we don't have to worry about making a mistake. So if I was to left click back, I get a prompt, do I want to close this spline? For what we're going to use later on, I would recommend you say yes. I can go to the Modify tab, so that's over from Create. And in the vertex, I can then select, and I can then move and adjust things back and forth. So if I don't like the shape, I can still edit and change this. Good stuff. A good point is to say that, let's just say, for example, you're not happy with the shapes that you've created. Maybe you've missed something out. We can right click with the line still selected and go to Refine. Refine is a great little tool because it means every time I left click, a new vertex appears. So if I was to very quickly left click and create 4 new vertexes, I can pull it down and adjust and then give myself a new little section to play with. As I said before, we want to get away from just using a box. Boxes are boring. So what can we do to make this shape a bit more interesting? Likewise, let's just say, for example, we click on vertex, we've got too many vertexes, then absolutely we can still delete them, and I found the easiest way of deleting them is to just press delete in the keyboard. It will snap to, and we go from there. But let's keep this shape going. Now, I like to use splines. This is basically a spline or a line. And the reason for that, it's nice and easy for me to draw a floor plan. I could, if I wanted to, bring in a reference image of an actual floor plan or building plan, and from there just quite simply trace around it. You still absolutely can do that, and I've got some advice and little links as well as tutorials that can help guide you through that process. But to make sure this tutorial is as concise and compact as possible, I'm just going to make this nice and quick. From here, what I like about lines is I can add modifiers to do a lot of the heavy lifting for me. What I'm going to do in my perspective view here, I'm going to make sure my line is selected by left clicking on it. I've got the move tool, which is this one here, selected, and I'm just going to hold shift and drag up. And I'm going to make a copy. So the clone options, copy, instance and reference, we're going to make a copy and press OK. So the reason I'm doing this is I'm going to be a bit lazy and think about how can I get away with using different modifiers to basically make this feel like a room. In order to do so, if I click on the base of the bottom line, I go to the Modify tab, I go to the Modify list or Modifier list, and left click. I'm now going to go to Extrude, this one down here, and left click. Now, extrude gives it a degree of thickness, so make sure the amount is 1 or something higher. Don't get too bogged down with numerical values. It's totally based on your computer, last settings that you've got put on, and of course scale applied. So we're just looking to have a degree of thickness. So if I was to increase this thickness back and forth, you can see. For myself, 1 or 2 is probably enough. This is going to act as our floor. Because if we don't do that, and of course if we don't close off the spline like we did before, that's where we got that little prompt, you want to close the spline, it's unlikely that extrude's going to work for us, in this case of making a floor. I made a direct copy because this top line is going to be our walls. And instead of trying to draw around things again, it's much quicker if I just copy the original source, which is the line. And this one, I'm going to go to the modify list, and I'm going to go to rendable spline. Where am I? Here we go. I've got these settings already plugged in, so let's have a wee go back. You'll see as soon as you apply parameters, you'll probably find that radio, or basically the first option, pops up first. If we zoom in, you can actually see if I was to increase the thickness of this, it creates a pipe. Now, this technique is great for creating, well, as you imagine, like pipes, or even quite nice for wires, and we can spend a bit more time talking about that. But if I go to rectangular, I can actually increase the size and the thickness of this to basically act as walls. And I can do that. And I can move this down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color of my walls without applying any fancy textures and stuff, just to make it a little easier to see. So I've got my floor and I've got my walls to play with. Great. I'm going to make sure that if you're on default, the edge faces is selected. If it's not selected, just scroll down, left click, and apply it. I think I'll change the color just so it's a little easier for you guys to see. There we go. So I can see my edges and lines have been applied. Now, we're going to cover about what we can do to make this a bit more interesting. It's already farther away from the box shape, so that's always encouraging. The reason I like to use lines or splines is that even though I've got my rental spline and these different modifiers applied, if I was to left click on this little eye icon, I can go back to my line. I can still go to line, I can still move and adjust these points back and forth, and when I update it, it'll be updated. But it hasn't done anything for the bottom spline, so just be very careful that if you're going to edit and change anything, make sure that you apply it to both. That's probably best, and just make sure you've got your line that you're happy with and clone or copy it tight so that you can apply it both to the walls and to the floor. Or you can make an instance, and we can talk about that in time. But I want to make sure this is a nice quick tutorial that I don't get bogged down, or don't bog you down with too many of the details just yet. Well, with this box, we've got a box, but what can we do to add windows and doors? We are going to talk later on about using Pro Boolean. There's pros and cons to it, but what I'd like to talk to you about is another method which we're just going to use connect. We're going to edit and change some of the polygons, and I think it's a much cleaner and more efficient way of creating your windows and your doors and everything else. So if I was to, in the modify list with the walls still selected, I go to modify and I scroll down, and I'm going to go for edit poly and left click. Within edit poly, I'm just going to go to edge. I'm going to left click and drag to rectangular, select all of the edges that are going vertical. And if I was to scroll down and go to connect, it's not the big button that says connect, it's actually the little settings to the right that I would recommend you click on. If we've left click on that, you'll see this little red line that cuts through the entire object. I've got one line, so I get one line here. If I click 2, I'll get 2. And of course, I can change here the settings, so how wide or the distance between these lines, and of course offset, where do I want them to be. I'm just going to keep that at 0, and I'm just probably change that to 15. Once again, your settings will probably be different, and don't worry because we can still edit and change. Once I'm happy, I'm just going to left click on the little tick box. If I'm not happy, I press the little X. Here, I can still edit and change things back and forth. I've got these lines because they're going to act as my windows and of course the height of my door frame. We can still edit and change these individually, But let's have a little look and see what we can do to have a bit of fun. So I'm just going to randomly select some edges and points, or should I say polygons. So I'm just going to scroll up, go to polygon, or if you prefer, up here in the little triangle, I can actually select polygon here. They do exactly the same thing, so don't worry. I'm just going to grab some windows, so I'm going to left click on that polygon there. I think I'll grab this polygon here and this one here. Now I make sure that I select both the inside and the out, so doing so, I'm going to grab this one, and this one here. So I'm just going to start off with the windows. Now, I don't want to just delete them or start doing something with windows just yet. I like to have them selected and I like to scroll down and I'm going to go to Inset. Instead of the big button, settings to the right of it, and I left click. And from here, I can change the values. It just gives me a slight border that goes around. I find that pretty helpful and it makes it look more like a window so you still have a little bit of wall going around. And I'm just going to press, change the settings to suit yourself. I'm just going to press the tick. With them still selected, they're still selected because they're highlighted red, pardon me. I'm just going to press delete on the keyboard. By doing so, I can actually look through the object, which is pretty cool. But you will, if I go back, and there I am. If I was to zoom in a little bit, you can actually see that I've got an undesirable gap. I don't want that. So if I was to basically select one edge, hold Control, and select another opposite edge, I can now use left click on bridge to fill that gap. Now what I'm going to do is very quickly go around. I might even speed up the footage just to make life a little bit easier for you and for me, but I'm just going to do exactly the same technique all the way around, and if I encounter a problem, which I'll show you later on, what we can do as a plan B. I always like to think there's a plan B. Now, this leads us to a point that, just say for example, an edge doesn't bridge. Now, in this case, it will, but let's just say if I go back, it doesn't for whatever reason. I can still select one edge, hold shift, and then drag to one side, and it will generate or basically create a polygon for me. I now have to look into how am I going to link these together. So if I go to vertex, I can see the edges of the vertexes there, and I find one of the easiest ways is I use target weld. Target weld allows me to left click to select, grab or basically select one of the vertexes, and then I get a little dashed line that appears. It will select basically a vertex close by, and if I left click on it, it will snap to it and weld it and join it together, which makes life a lot easier for me. If I was to do the same thing again, target weld, left click, dashed line appears, and then I go to the vertex I want to select it. That does make life a lot easier for me, so just in case bridge doesn't work for you, there's always a plan B. So I'll save that. So what I've got so far is going around, I've got my windows, I've moved some edges back and forth, and I can still adjust. So let's just say a window is too big for a reason. I can still go in, select the edges of it, so basically this one, and I can still move and adjust them back and forth how I see. However I wish. So if I select these edges, I'll see if I can move over. There I go. I can move and adjust the width of them and placement. So it's not all lost, so don't worry about that. If I was to go back a stage or two, so let's just say I go to the top view and we have now a little chat about shapes or the splines. So the line tool, just to recap, if I left click, I get my first vertex and point, I hold shift, I can then snap it to get the shape that I want. It'll be quite jagged or, there you go, it will be quite angular, but it does the trick. If I go to line again, I hold shift, left click and drag, what I get after I release, there we go. So if I was to left click and drag, there I go, I get a curve. I can still go back to the line, so if I left click, hold shift, I can still snap it. Absolutely, but if I want my curve, I just left click and hold, and I can get a curve that I desire. And come back and close it off. I can still go back to modify, go to the vertex, and I can change with the anchoring points the curve. There's pros and cons to it, so don't worry about that. If, for example, if I just delete that, maybe I've made a mistake. I've got something quite angular here, and I want to add a curve. Then I find one of the easiest options is go to vertex, I scroll down, I go to the fillet tool, and if I select one vertex, left click and drag, it will split that vertex into two, and within that I can select and change the anchoring points to change the curve. So I find it's almost easier to create something quite angular by left clicking, get my basic shape. I can still right click to refine. I can still use the fillet tool to round off or add edges if I wish. But let's get rid of this one for now. Oh, here we go. We've got our basic shape there, but we're missing a door. So I'm going to add in a door, probably in this edge here, somewhere there. So let's just have a look. I'm going to go to edge, just like I did before, and instead of selecting across the way, or horizontally, I'm going to select vertically. I don't want to select all of them, so if I select too much, I can press Alt and deselect what I don't want. I just want the edges on this side, this one. If I zoom in a little bit, I'm going to use the same tools and techniques I did before. I'm going to use Connect, go to Settings. I've got 2, because that gives me 2 lines. If I just had 1, not much of a door. 2, and I change the values so I'm quite happy with them. Here I can also offset where I want the door to go, but if I'm not happy, I can still edit and change them after. So I press the little tick box. Just to show you that, I can still move these edges back and forth. I can widen them, I can do as I see fit. What I'm going to do from here is I'm going to select polygon, hold down shift, and select the polygons I don't want. I press delete, and get rid of them. So I can do that internally as well, and my advice, there'll be one there, get rid of that one too, because it'll save you time in the long run. Here I go, I'm going back to edge. You're going to get tired of this, but it does work, so I'm going to use edge, select there, select here, and I'm just going to use bridge. I'm going to use exactly the same technique that I did for the windows, for the doors. I'm just filling in that little gap, because if I don't, well, I'm going to have a gap. And it doesn't take long, so the good thing is that you don't have to spend ages doing this. This is just more of a refinement than anything else. And I find that the good thing is, let's see if I can get this. I find that you can, if you're selecting the line tool or using the line. Let's see. There we go. Okay, cool. So I'll save that. So with the line tool, you could make a placeholder within your environment, be it 3D or within a games engine, and you could keep going back into the original 3D file that you've got here, in this case here, and refine, edit, and update it as you go. And that way that, yeah, you can find something a bit more refined and has all the shapes you want. So basically you can experiment as you model away. So that gets you a basic shape, and we get away from just, having a boring block or square. What I'd recommend, so if you're looking at an environment, what I learned working at Access Studios, which I thought was a great piece of advice, was that if you're looking at this classroom environment here, try and find, or any environment I should say, Try and find 7 repeatable objects within a scene. That means that you're modeling, say, one object that could be copied and cloned several times to help populate that space. Some examples I've got here for this space here, the one on the top left, a table, a chair, lights, power sockets, support beams, these are basically support beams going across the roof, cables, and light switches. In terms of hero items or specials, these would be items that are kind of a one-off that would only be, say, maybe one object in that scene. That would be, say, the projector at the top here, PC and stand in the bottom right-hand corner, and the radiator, once again, on the right-hand side. If you're looking to, say, create a space that has repeatable items, that has a lot of them, so maybe an office space or a library that has multiple books, my advice to you is make 4 different shapes. So you have one shape here, 2 that's a bit shorter and fatter, 3 is a bit longer and thinner, 4 is kind of a combination of halfway through. So with that, with these 4 different shapes, they can be as simplistic as you want, but it just helps break up the similarity or the commonality that people will just kind of be drawn to for all the wrong reasons. If you think about these are the spines of the books, so you're looking at it from this drawing here, you're actually basing it more than anything else. If you wanted to create a spline, so something that we've just done, and I'll just draw it again so you can see, I'd probably create something. So once again, the 7 repeatable items go for here, the books go for here, and these are the splines, so they look like that front on. So what we have here, this is actually the top-down view of where the book would be. So if I was to draw a spline, I would probably create something that would be like a top-down view of the spline, something like this. I could make this as long as I wanted to, if I wanted to extend it out, but if I was to use this and then use extrude to basically go here and then make it longer, it doesn't have to have pages or an insert. We can get away with something quite simplistic because ultimately we're just looking for this. The spline, or sorry, the spine made out of a spline, and a little bit of the front and back cover, just enough to fool the user or the audience. And I would do it for 4 of these books. Mostly at that point, it's more of a surfacing and texturing challenge than anything else, but it's enough to at least get you guys thinking. I would also, before I jump back to Max and think about, okay, what else can we do with splines, or what other objects and tools might be worth considering, I would recommend... So I would recommend you can, of course, use any tutorials you wish. There's a bunch of them, but feel free to experiment. There's multiple ways of creating environments. What I've shown you is using a spline. Super simple, but it gets the job done. I would recommend looking at environmental artists. So this is Zero. I worked with Zero at Axis Studios. Lovely guy, great work. And he's actually got a tutorial. I'll try again. He's actually got a tutorial on creating environments. And within that, he uses SpeedTree, which is a plugin or basically a tool for actually creating trees quickly. Substance Painter, which we do have licenses within the university, which is great, in D35 and C28. And he uses the Houdini pipeline. Houdini is a great tool. We used it within Axis to help pull different resources together. I'd be cautious about diving in too soon with that. It's a great tool to learn, but please keep in mind that every studio or company might use it in a different way, or might even use a different piece of software. So if I was to go back into 3D Studio Max here, we've got our basic environment. You've got that, and I'll give you a copy of that. That's not an issue whatsoever. I mentioned Boolean, or the Boolean tool. So if I was to go to standard, and I'm just going to do this super quickly, I'm just going to make a cube, and then I'm going to make another cube. And this one is intentionally going to phase through, or basically be within the other object. And I was just to go here. And if I was to get these ones and just let's focus on this. So the Pro Boolean tool is powerful, and it can be super helpful, especially if you want to cut one shape out of another. Try and think of it as a cookie cutter. So if I select this big object, the orange square as my main object, I go to Compound Objects within the Create tab and Geometry tab. I've got Pro Boolean and I've got Boolean. I personally find that Pro Boolean gives the most Yeah, exact results. Doesn't cause too much problems. If I left click, you'll see that in terms of operation and parameters, I can do union, intersection, merge, attach, bunch of things. I just want to subtract, so I'm going to leave it as the default, and I'm going to start picking, and I left click on the other object. You'll see that it cuts out the other object, which is nice and neat. You can, in consideration, use that to cut out windows and doors. I personally wouldn't go down that route. You'll see that if I go back to the Modify tab, this has changed from being called cube and it's now Pro Boolean. I still have the options here, but in comparison to this one, the one I used and started off with in terms of the line, making rendezvous spline, I can go back and edit and change as much as I like. So I think it gives me greater flexibility and freedom, especially if I'm trying to respond to client or supervisor feedback. So Pro Boolean is a great tool. Just be cautious or sparing of how you use it. If I was to get rid of that one and we go back to splines, then I'll leave you to get cracked on with it. I still go to splines, the line tool. I will do it very quickly, and I'm just going to do this so that we can start talking about other ways that you can use the spline. I'll just very quickly use this. Good stuff. So, what else can I do? Well, with the spline tool, I can still absolutely grab my vertexes and start moving them up and down and everything else that way. So I'm just going to do this super quickly. Please don't judge me. Yeah, we'll just go for that for now. And of course, you can still edit, change, curve, all the good stuff. All I wanted to show that with your curve, it doesn't have to be flat. You can move it up and down and left and right and all manner of things that as you see fit. So I'm going to use a rendable spline, the same technique I used to create the walls. This is great for creating pipes and wires. So for this straight one, I'm going to go in and I am going to go to, let's see, rendable spline. Once again, I find this super easy and helpful. And instead of going to rectangular, that's what we use for the walls, we're going to go to radial. And from that, it's just a pipe. But the advantage is that if I have this, I can go to vertex, I can go to refine, and I can add in different sections. So this can be like super helpful, but maybe I've made a mistake and I want to create something. Maybe it's just like a pipe that's going around a box or something like that. I'm just going to do this quickly. I keep saying that, I should actually just do it. Let's just say, oh, excuse me, it's a live show. If I was to grab these vertexes, I'm going to use fillet. So it's the same tools we've talked about in this session. Round off these edges and then go back to rendable spline. It's applied. So I find it super easy, and if I was to change the thickness of this, I'll change it to 5. Once again, just a value so I don't get bogged down with it too much. Then yeah, I can create pipes, gas pipes, or anything else that's going through that scene. For here, I've got my spline that's a bit more contorted. I'm still going to use rendable spline because it's super easy. I'll pull down the value, so I'll make it say 2. I find it really good for wires and cables, particularly at the back of like computers. And you don't have to spend a bunch of time doing it or stressing yourself out. So it's a technique, but I still think that splines, especially when you're starting out, is a super easy tool just to get used to and experiment with. So I hope that's enough to get you started. It's only meant to be a very quick tutorial to introduce you to some of the points. Not necessarily within a particular module, but can certainly help that if you're working on a module for games or for animation or for modeling, maybe this is something that could be extra practice or something that can help you with a brief or even a personal project. But please get back to me, let me know if this is helpful, any other tutorials that you'd like to see, or if you want me to expand upon points. I think I mentioned, but just in case I didn't, the creation of this in the top view is trying to think about it as a floor plan. You absolutely can pull in a floor plan or any reference you wish, and then quite simply trace around it if you want it to be exact or if you want it to follow a particular path. That's absolutely doable. We can cover that a bit more if you want another follow-up tutorial. And even though we've just got the basic shape, the windows and the doors, we could do more with it in terms of, okay, we can actually design the windows, pop them in, we can get a door. There's so much more we can do with it, but it's just to get you the bare bones. Okay. Well, thank you for your time, but please let me know how you get on and if you like any more of these.